Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to COVID-19 and the insurers' response, Jon's regular series on what the insurers are doing with regard to COVID. This is his January update. Some of you may have seen some of the details before, but obviously there's new information since the last time Jon ran this. For those of you that are new, welcome. As always, Jon's happy to answer any questions that you have, so if you could pop those into the Q&A or chat tools on the bottom toolbar of your screen. We will answer these at the end. For any of you who wish to contact Jon directly about a specific issue that you may or may not be having, it's Jon Sharp, that's Jon Sharp, SHARP, at silverllp.com. And as always, certificates will be sent out, and this recording will be loaded onto our YouTube channel if you wish to download it and watch it all over again, just for the sheer hell of it. Right, Jon, without any further ado, I will push this over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Julie. Watching it all over again for the sheer hell of it. Well, I'm not sure about that. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies to those that have seen some of these slides before, but obviously we've got new attendees at this time, so we'll be going over a little bit of old ground, but there is new information at the end in regard to the appeal in relation to last year's business interruption decision by Lord Justice Flo. So, without further ado, that's me. Less said about him, the better. All the details are on the website. So this seminar addresses insurance issues generally. Everybody's insurance policies differ, and more about that later on. It's as accurate as it can be given the rapidly changing situation. There are still changes every day. And unfortunately, I can't address specific situations. You need to speak to your broker, lawyer, or indeed me, or other advisor in relation to the insurances that you have. If we look at the agenda, we'll talk about Act of God briefly, general information about the virus again briefly, office policies, force majeure frustration, what the insurance market's approach was, mitigation and site closure, quick look at travel insurance because I still get asked an awful lot of questions about that. Then the recent developments, so what happened really since April of last year and the various responses, and then the FCA business interruption insurance test case. Let's be clear, when this virus started, everyone said it was an act of God. Well, it's clearly not an act of God. Possible causes, well, consumption of animals outside the food chain, and the conspiracy theory, which is gaining more weight than ever now that it was man-made. There was an escape from a laboratory in Wuhan. Obviously, those theories are encouraged by the lack of any cooperation by the Chinese authorities. Current law, though, is set out in the decision of Lord Hobhouse in the Transco PLC case in Stockport Metropolitan Borough Council. Lord Hobson was very clear, and this definition is adopted virtually worldwide. He described an act of God as an event which involves no human agency, is not realistically possible to guard against, is due directly and exclusively to natural causes, and could not have been prevented by any amount of foresight, plans, and care. Act of God is rarely found. It has been found in a couple of shipping cases, where, for example, a port has flooded to levels never ever seen before, for example. That would be a classic act of God. But this virus is not. What's known about the virus? Well, still very little. There was stories earlier on that didn't react well to heat. Well, we all know that's the case. Alcohol, well, no, it doesn't really. Measures have been put in place by most governments around the world, and they have been pretty consistent. Initially, it was containment, then it was to delay the spread. We have now got the cure, which is good news for everyone. But one thing is clear, that no government was prepared for this. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, not one single government was ready, despite warnings. And the first was ironically given by George Bush. I've given you the link there. This was back in 2005, after we had the first SARS breakout. It's an interesting 1.5 minute read, and it's very interesting to say that he doesn't look at it as if it's an if. He looks at it as if it's a when. And unfortunately, he was right. Now, your insurance policies, you need to understand this distinction. I do bang on about this an awful lot, and I do apologise for those that see me before, but it is still important and people still get it wrong. There is the world of difference between your cover note and your policy wording. So, this is a policy schedule or cover note, if you like. This, in fact, is the firm's one for our office contents. And you will see it's actually 4 pages long, and it gives a whole list of amounts that are potentially payable under the policy. Okay, but that's all it is. It's a schedule of what is potentially payable under the policy, and it puts the amounts next to the. But that's all it does. It does nothing more. This is the policy wording that goes with that schedule. Now, this is a 63-page document, closely typed, and this defines what the actual cover is under the terms of our office policy. Now, that is your policy wording. Your cover note only identifies the main terms of the policy and is not your contract with your insurance. That's long established English law. The policy wording is, this is your contract with your insurance company, and it needs careful reading by responsible officers in your company to ensure that it meets your company's requirements. Same for you as individuals. If you get a policy come through your door, your car policy would be the typical one, don't just read the cover note, because that is not your contract with your insurance company. You need to find the policy wording that goes with it to make sure that what you're using your car for is covered under the terms of the policy. So much reliance is placed on policy wordings by the law that in a case which I did called Kuwait Airways against Kuwait Insurance Company back in 1990, after the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq, that no policy wording had been agreed for the year in which the aircraft Kuwait Airways were taken, but the court said that doesn't matter. They looked at the previous year's policy wording to interpret the policy. Remember, if your business changes in any way throughout the year, including taking on new or unusual types of work, you need to update your underwriters. Your policy wording, if you like, is a living document. So if you decide to take on a new type of construction that you don't normally do, don't assume that your insurance policy will cover that new type of work. You need to specifically tell your underwriters through your broker or directly that this is what we're going to do. Have you got a problem with it? Are we covered under the policy? They will come back to you. They may well say, yes, you are, don't worry. Or they might say, well, actually, you're not, but we can cover you. It's going to cost you an extra £1,000. But do tell them. Don't assume that your policy will cover new types of work. Now, in relation to office policies, I think we've all had to abandon our offices, primarily because of government instructions. And so, did you have cover? You needed to leave your offices, and there are 2 types of cover. There is what's called passive cover or intervention cover. And of course, there will always be limits on your policy and in relation to proving loss. So I'll just go back to that slide. Let me just define what passive cover or intervention cover is. Intervention cover is if you have to leave your office because something has prevented you physically from being in your office. So a flood, a fire. Yeah, that is what's called intervention cover. Passive cover is the situation we find ourselves in now, where effectively we've had to leave our offices because of something that, I suppose the best definition would be, is surrounding the premises, therefore not allowing us to gain entry. There is a distinction between the 2. Most policies, in fact all policies, will have intervention cover. Your basic policy will have cover for fire, will have cover for damage, will have cover for flood. It may not, though, have what's called passive cover. So it may not contain a clause which says that if you are forced to leave by local authority or government action, we will respond. It may not have that. It's only the more expensive policies that had that type of cover. Similarly, disease, notifiable diseases, etc. cover is only normally contained in the more expensive policies. Force majeure, I'll go through this really quickly, but I'm worried that with this situation still continuing, people are still entering into contracts, and I'm very worried that people are not putting in a proper force majeure clause. So coronavirus has undoubtedly caused delay to contractual obligations. I think that's fairly obvious. The contract contains a force majeure clause. This excuses one or both parties for their performance of the contract if certain events occur. Force majeure has no fixed interpretation in English law, so each case will be individually considered by the courts unless the circumstances are specifically set out within the force majeure clause. Okay, so if you have been affected by the pandemic, you should check your force majeure clause in your contracts, if there is one. Many contracts don't have them. So when entering into new contracts, business should consider whether to include from now on force majeure clauses appropriate to the type of business locations in which it operates, so that reference is made specifically to pandemics and to epidemics. The clause should also include potential government reactions to outbreaks such as quarantine measures in large cities, closure of public transport, which will prevent the company's employees from working and prevent the performance of the party's obligations. Shipping contracts contain significant force majeure clauses. They generally always contain a clause which refers to actions of foreign governments, acts of princes and rulers. You can see how old they are. Import and export bans and restrictions, they're all defined as force majeure clauses. It is not the case in most construction contracts that such clauses exist. They should. And the contract should say as well what happens if a force majeure event arises. There's no point in saying if the government closes everything down, then that's fine. But you need to say what happens to the contract then. Okay? Frustration as well. Lots of people try to argue frustration when this pandemic started, and basically frustration is where there is no applicable force majeure clause. Another avenue might be to invoke the doctrine of frustration. A contract may be brought to an end where something unforeseen to either party occurs after the formation of the contract, as long as it's through no fault of that party, and that has the effect of making it commercially or physically impossible to perform the contract. Now, whilst it might be possible to argue that the pandemic has frustrated the contract, the courts are often unwilling to find that a contract has been frustrated. The problem with frustration is that it terminates the contract permanently. Both parties are excused from the contract. It would, however, be much better if, when drafting new contracts, that you put in a clause which specifically refers to events such as pandemics, rather than trying to use general law principles such as the of frustration. The courts are very reluctant to hold that contracts have been frustrated because they're interfering directly with parties' agreed terms. So the best thing to do, put a force majeure clause in, define what it covers, and also put in your contract the consequences of if the force majeure event arises, what happens to the contract. Just excuse me a second. Quick swig of tea. Now the insurance market's approach. So did the insurance market come running to all of our aid in our hour of need with in particular paying out on business interruption clauses? No, it didn't. So first of all, you need to find out what sort of cover you may have in respect of delay and cancellation of contracts. Well, obviously look at business interruption clauses. If they are in your policies, there will be a trigger event. Now, let me just give you one example of, in all a business interruption clause that would respond no matter what type of policy you have. You've got a fish and chip shop, you're doing very well, nice crispy fish, and you have a fire, one of your fryers catches fire, and you're out of the premises for 3 months. Yeah. Not only will insurers pay for the damage caused by the fire, they will also, under a business interruption clause, pay you some compensation for the time that your business is not operating. It will either be your turnover or it will be your loss of profit. That will be in all, but what you've got to make sure is that you have got cover for pandemic, government closure, etc., and see if that triggers your business interruption clause, and that's been the problem. You might have some cover somewhere for delaying receipt of essential supplies. You could indeed buy specific policies that cover you for that. Needs to contract, check your contractor's all-risk cover. And as I've said and discussed earlier, have a look at what your office policy says. What's assisted? Well, the fact that coronavirus was declared a pandemic and a notifiable disease did ultimately assist. However, and this is the point, insurers have argued that this outbreak is not within the reasonable contemplation of either party when the insurance cover was taken out, and are already trying to restrict, in fact, have already restricted cover offered in any new policies. You will find that there is no way, unless you pay an absolute fortune, that you will get any form of cover for pandemics, notifiable diseases, etc. And they have excluded cover from any new policies from about mid-Feb of last year in relation to viruses, pandemic, notifiable diseases, etc. Now, if you are fortunate to have policies that include some kind of cover for pandemic and notifiable diseases, then you still have a duty to mitigate your loss. This means, for example, that because you think you've got cover, you can't just close your office, walk away. If you have passive cover, you must wait until the government has told you to close your office. You can't just think, I mean, most offices have been closed now, but at the start of this, you couldn't have just gone, ooh, I don't fancy this, and shut. Insurers wouldn't pay. They would say, well, you didn't wait. The government told you to shut, but at the time you shut, the government's advice was not that. And in terms of business interruption, you must still continue to operate your business to the best of your ability. You can't simply say, as said before, we're covered, therefore we're shutting up shop. It's not how it works. You must continue to operate your business to the very best of your ability in order to minimize the claim that you may be able to make on your insurance policy. The classic situation where mitigation is very important is if you had a flood in your warehouse. Insurers do expect you to try and clear up after the flood, so to take out the floating boxes, even if they are irreparably damaged. They do not expect, when the loss adjuster comes round, to find that no action has been taken to clear the flood, everything's still floating knee deep in water. They expect you to have done your best to mitigate your loss. The next point is this, and frankly, it's probably too late now if you haven't done this, is notification. You must inform your insurers as soon as possible that you may be making a claim. Even if you can't put figures on your claim, you must notify them of a potential claim. Now, when I did these slides at that stage, it was probably too early to make claims on the business interruption policy. You would have needed to, you still do need to be able to substantiate the fact that your business has suffered loss as a result of business interruption, and you will need at least 1-2 months figure to be able to clearly demonstrate that to insurers. When I did these slides at the start of this, it would have been too early. Now, you've had probably well over 9 months of losses, so you can start putting your numbers on your claim. But, and this is the big but, if you have not by now notified your insurers of a potential claim under your business interruption clauses, then it's probably now too late. Insurers, not on most insurance policies contain a notification clause, which was not changed by the new Insurance Act, that says you must notify us immediately you become aware of any claim, and in any event within 30 days. That's normally the notification clause period. Underwriters would realistically say now, and with a good chance of success, that if you suddenly in January of this year say we're making a claim on our business interruption policy, they will turn around and say, excuse me, where have you been for the last 9 months? This is late notification, we won't be paying you. So you need to communicate continually with your brokers to ask them what you should be doing in the current circumstances, be guided by their advice as to what you could claim for and when you should be claiming it and when you should be notifying insurers as to the potential for claims. So I've said, if you haven't got the business interruption, you haven't notified that you'll be making a claim, you will run into a late notification argument. The other issue is this, and this has been becoming more and more important. If you shut your offices or sites, you must tell your insurers and keep them updated. Again, most insurance policies contain a clause that cancels cover if premises, sites are not occupied or work for more than 30 days. Actually, it can be a bit more than that, but it's not much more than 60. So if you haven't worked on a site for whatever reason, you need to tell insurers, look, we've locked the site up, but we're not working on it, we're not doing anything with it. Same with your offices. If you can't use your offices, you need to tell your insurers, look, we shut our offices in accordance with the government advice, etc. They're all locked up, but you need to know. Okay? Travel insurance. I'm only going to mention this briefly because I still get asked lots of questions about it. It's unlikely now that travel insurance will cover cancellation or delays as a result of the coronavirus. I think that's pretty obvious. Insurers have been, those that did provide the cover, will not be doing so in the future. So if you are fortunate to have a travel policy which you took out before the coronavirus pandemic hit, so realistically, you would have had to taken out your policy before January of last year. Do not, under any circumstances, cancel your holiday flights. Wait until, the airline has cancelled your flight, and wait for the government advice from the Foreign Commonwealth Office recommending not to travel to your particular destination. Do not do anything voluntarily, because insurers will say that's your decision to cancel. It was not something you were forced to by the United Kingdom government, in particular by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. But as I said, all travel insurance policies going forward will not contain any cover for coronavirus. But that said, the holiday industry has, to the best of its ability at least, adapted, in particular airlines. If you can't travel, airlines are offering you vouchers. Though contractually, that should just be giving you your money back, but there we go. So it may not be that relevant, but just be careful in future. Remember, travel insurance is not going to cover pandemics. Insurers have long memories, and it will be a very long time before they start to offer any form of cover for notifiable diseases, pandemics, etc. So what has happened? What were the further developments? What did everyone say when insurers said we're not paying out business interruption claims? Well, it's become clear from the first instance decision of Lord Justice Flo, which I will come on to in a minute, that there was a meeting between Richie Sunak and I think he invited 7 of the leading insurers to go and have tea with him in Downing Street, where he basically says to them, now come on chaps, you will do the decent thing, won't you? In fact, only 2 insurers went to the meeting, and they clearly didn't listen to him or didn't pay any attention and said, you're having a laugh, we're not doing that. That was disappointing. I did think at one stage that the government would actually take some action against insurers and effectively force them to pay, but the government didn't. The chairman of Lloyd's was similarly encouraging insurers to make payments. Back in April of last year, he was saying that he expected all of those insurers under the Lloyd's of London umbrella to be paying out in respect of business interruption and in particular event cancellation policies. Now, some frankly did, but the vast majority didn't and ignored what he said. So, what was the response initially of the FCA? Well, it wrote letters again in April of last year saying, look, you need to be very clear with all your customers as to why you're declining cover, etc. You need to set it out clearly. You still need to treat your customers fairly. It was, if you like, a warning shot to insurers to say, we're watching what's going on, behave sensibly and properly. But the rage and the anger demonstrated by policyholders against insurers for not paying out all these business interruption policies, where many people had paid additional premium to get the higher cover to include notifiable diseases, etc., became such. I don't think I've seen so many column inches in newspapers dedicated to insurers in my life that the FCA ultimately had to act. We were also then starting to get some opinions from barristers from April, May, June time on what their take on was whether what insurers were doing was actually legally correct. And in particular, there was the thoughts of one Essex Court Chambers barrister, whose name I completely forget for the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, may well come back to me. But his article's on the website. And what he said was that he thought that if you had the wider extension cover, so if there is an outbreak of a notifiable disease within a 25-mile radius of your office, then his view was that the insurers must pay. There is only one real case on this point. I will come back to that shortly when I discuss the first instance decision of Lord Justice Flo and Lord Justice Butcher. So the business interruption insurance test case. This was the FCA actually being a proper regulator. There isn't any argument, and I don't think there's been any criticism of its conduct. The FCA regulates all financial institutions in this country, including insurers, banks, etc. And it is a regulator with teeth. It is not a regulator like the water regulator who says to its companies, you've been very naughty boys, pay this man £50. This is a regulator that has real teeth. I think its record fine was against Barclays, where it fined it £39 billion. It doesn't like people breaching its rules, but its big mantra, if you like, is treating your customers fairly. It became clear to the FCA from the complaints that it was receiving that insurers were not treating their customers fairly. They were not dealing with them openly and honestly. And therefore it decided it would have to take some action. So it spoke to a number of insurers and brought to this test case by issuing proceedings in the commercial court against 7 insurers covering, I think, some 27 policy wordings. It picked these insurers and these policy wordings because these policy wordings contain the most common business interruption clauses. There are, in fact, and this is why it's still a problem, 78 different types of business interruption covers available, and only 27 have been looked at them. Now, of course, some of the ones that have been looked at, the wording will be the same in the other 78, but not necessarily so. And I'll come back to that point later. So the FCA got together with insurers and they decided on a mutual objective. And the mutual objective was shortly to provide some clarity as to when people can claim under their business interruption policies and when they can't. And there was a framework document prepared, which was quite detailed, but required a good deal of cooperation from both the FCA and from insurers to get it together. And they cooperated and set out a relatively narrow time scale to have these matters resolved as quickly as possible. And the cases all proceeded to progress properly, but that was the last cooperation that the FCA and insurers gave. The FCA very firmly stood in the shoes of policyholders and argued against every last single point that insurers made in respect of why they shouldn't be paying cover. Issues to be determined were all based on, to some extent, assumed facts. But I think actually if you read the first instance decision, which is on the FCA's website, by the way, all the transparency has been fabulous. All of the pleadings, etc., are all on the FCA's website, including the decision. There's no question that this was a nice, cozy arrangement between regulator and insurers. This was a fairly bitter battle. But it became fairly clear from the first instance decision that a good deal of what had been assumed actually were real facts. And if you read Lord Justice Flo's summary of the factual scenarios surrounding business interruption COVID-19 generally, exceptionally detailed. It's the best I've seen in terms of what has actually happened since March of last year. There was then a process, having sort of agreed assumed facts, there was then in the framework agreement a process for agreeing the agreed facts, sorry, the assumed facts, sorry, that should be. And that was all done. The case started, I believe, in June, and the decision was handed down in late September. Now, one of the issues that we had in relation to business interruption insurance is that apart from the fish and chip situation, which I described to you earlier, so the fire, you get paid for the repairs to your shop because of the fire, and all policies would give you some business interruption cover, there was very, very little law on this factual scenario, where in fact there has been no physical damage to the property, but effectively passive damage by the outbreak of an epidemic and the government's response thereto. There was very little case law. The only case that was anywhere near it was a case called the Orient Express case. This was all to do with a hotel that was in New Orleans. And during the hurricane that struck New Orleans a few years ago, the really bad one where everything was flooded, all the levee broke. Sorry, my memory this morning is gone. I can't even remember. It's Katrina, I think it was. The hotel was damaged. Now that's fine. So you would have assumed, given my fish and chip scenario, that insurers would have paid out on the business interruption clause. They would have paid the repairs to the hotel and paid out the hotel for the time that it was closed whilst the repairs were carried out for its business interruption. Well, the answer was no, it didn't. The case was not decided like that. What the decision in the Orient Express case said was that because the whole of New Orleans was effectively devastated, shut, closed, you couldn't go there. I think there was a ban on traveling to New Orleans. There was no business to interrupt because the business didn't exist. And insurers relied heavily on that case in saying it's their reason for not for denying cover. Now, Lord Justice Flo, who is an exceptionally good insurance judge, he was one of the leading insurance counsel before he became a judge. He really knows his insurance, said that that decision was decided wrongly. And had it come back before the court today, then it would have been decided very differently. So insurers lost on that. And indeed, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, did indeed find that in the vast majority of cases, insurers had to pay out for business interruption losses. Now, not in all cases, but there were some winners and some losers. The FCA undoubtedly did win. And in, I think, 75% of the policies, cover was either found fully or found partially. However, there were some people who did well. A company called the Ecclesiastical Insurance Company had 3 insurance policies under examination by the court, and the court found that in relation to the ecclesiastical policies, ecclesiastical were right because of the particular type of wording. There was no cover for business interruption losses in these circumstances. Other companies sort of had a halfway house. So a company called Zurich, I think they had 4 policies under review, one of which was found to contain cover and the other 3 not. But other companies did very badly. Hiscox, for example, because they prided themselves, or did at least, on paying out every claim and always provided you with wide coverage, were found that yes, you are liable, you must pay. So the FCA did win, and it was a good day for policyholders under any circumstances. So what should you be doing now? Well, given that this first instance decision is in your favour, you need to start checking your policies. If you have got any form of business interruption cover that relates to pandemics or closure by foreign government, closure by governments, or closure by local authorities, you really should be looking at that. And if you haven't claimed, then try and make a claim now. You should also, by now, starting to put together your quantum to justify your claim. You will need to substantiate, because that will be the next argument. Insurers may say, well, okay, we've got to pay, but we're not paying a penny more than we absolutely have to. So you will need to justify your claim with detailed documentation, accounts, etc. And now is the time to start preparing that without any shadow of a doubt. Now you're all saying to me, well, John, there's an appeal, and there is indeed an appeal. Surprisingly enough, everyone wanted to appeal. The FCA also wanted to appeal because they said, actually, we don't fully agree with the decision. So they were given, in fact, everyone who wanted to appeal got permission to appeal. With the exception of Ecclesiastical, who said, no thanks, we won't appeal, we're very happy, thank you very much. And Zurich, who said, okay, no, that's fine, we won't appeal, no, we'll pay out on that policy, we're not going to appeal, thank you. And the appeal was heard in late November, early December last year. It concluded with the judge saying that they would try and get the decision to their decision by the end of Christmas, before Christmas, but if not in early January. Just before Christmas, they said, we aren't going to get it out. It will be January, and we're still waiting for that decision. However, it is widely expected that the decision will maybe make some changes, but it's not going to significantly alter the findings of the first instance decision. Hence my advice to start now looking at your policies, seeing you've got cover, and getting your documentation together. The issue is, and this is going to be a problem, that yes, 27 policy wordings were looked at, and yes, a lot of the wordings used in those policies were used in the other 78 policies. But in relation to the policies that were not looked at, those wordings will all be slightly different. So if you have one of the policies that has been looked at and cover which was confirmed, happy days, get your claim in. If you haven't got one of those policies and you've got one of the other 78, given that we now have judicial guidance on what is covered and what is not, it has to be worth running your business interruption clause past a solicitor who may be able to give you his own view, but if he can't, he will just simply send the case to counsel and ask him to advise. Now, given that counsel has those decisions now, and the clauses he will be looking at are relatively small, you're talking a very modest sum of money here. And I would encourage everyone to spend that relatively modest sum of money because the potential recovery is obviously quite large. And now we have the guidance Now we know which way the courts are going to interpret these policies. It has to be worth speculating a modest sum to get an opinion on your own wording. As soon as the appeal decision's out, I will probably do a 10-minute blog with Julie just to summarise what it says. But as I said, it is not expected to be changing the world in terms of the first instance decision. Lastly, just a quick word on premiums to cheer everybody up before I go. Insurers were already having issues. There was a lack of capacity in writing, in particular, construction business, because Lloyd said you've got to write this as profit or at a commercial rate, or don't write it at all. So there was a lack of capacity, which put insurance premiums up. We're still awaiting the decision on Grenfell, and insurers are really not looking forward to that one, as it's now widely expected that there will be some sort of conspiracy unmasked by the decision, which will affect insurance policies because they will have to pay out on that. And in addition, we had the 737 MAX situation earlier this year, all of which has driven up premiums dramatically. On top of that, insurers have now got to pay out for business interruption claims. This will mean that insurance premiums generally, and especially in construction and professional indemnity, are going to go through the roof for everyone. So unfortunately, whilst it's good news that the business interruption policies will be paying out, it's bad news generally because premiums are bound to rise. That was all I was going to say, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you found that useful. Hello, Julie. Hello, Julie.
Hello, John. Back in the room. Okay, we don't appear to have any questions. That's good. You've obviously answered everything splendidly, as always. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to everyone for joining us. As I said earlier, if you do have any direct questions for John, please feel free to email him at jonsharp@silverllp.com. He's always happy to answer these questions for you. We have another seminar tomorrow evening. It's the first in a new series of adjudication matters. The first one will be making a claim, and this is with a new member of the team, Mohammed Haq, who is a consultant, barrister, adjudicator, and quantum expert. So I know quite a few of you have signed up for that. If you'd like a place, please email me on seminars@silverllp.com. Certificates for today's seminar will be out by the end of the week. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Hope everyone has a good day. John, I will see you tomorrow. Thank you very much, everyone. Speak to you all soon.
Yep.
Thanks, John.
See you tomorrow, Julie. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Goodbye.